allegations by his adopted daughter that he sexually abused her when she was 7. Dylan Farrow resurrected the claims in an open letter, even appealing to Alan's Blue Jasmine star Cate Blanchett. The Aussie actor says she hopes Dylan and her family find some resolution and peace. The Seattle Seahawks are celebrating their first Super Bowl title after crushing the favourites, the Denver Broncos, 43 points to 8. And Anthony Kiedis and Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers must have been chilly indeed. They played shirtless at half-time alongside Bruno Mars in just 5 degrees. Awesome.
Yep, nothing on Meatloaf.
Awesome.
We could talk about the football, but let's face it, most people in Australia care more about the ads. And here to talk us through this year's batch is Creative Director of Madigan Communications, Dee Madigan. Dee, these ads, they're huge news every year. Which were your favourites?
Well, there's a lot of great ones, and about half the ads in the Super Bowl are for car makers because they've got the money. But my favourite ad is a car ad that doesn't actually feature the car until the very last frame. But it gives you the best reason for buying the car. So in terms of advertising, I think this one's the best. We'll have a look at this one now.
So you're probably expecting me to crash a car or blow something up. But really, I'm here to talk about car safety. Look around you. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to give each and every one of them a hug. I'll wait. Those people you just hugged, they're real. They're not crash test dummies. They're not engineering data. And their safety matters as much to Honda as it matters to you. You can let go now, Fred.
Brilliant, Dee. Any others?
Look, there is another one that it just made me laugh out loud for its sheer WTF factor. Take a look at this one.
Hello, America. The folks at Wonderful Pistachios have asked me to help sell their product. But come on. They're wonderful. I'm wonderful. They'll sell themselves. I think we're done. Yeah. You were good. Folks, evidently sales of pistachios have not skyrocketed in the last 30 seconds due to a lack of branding. Well, let's take care of that. Pistachio, pistachio. Wait for it.
Oh, vintage Colbert. I have to ask you, Dee, we talk every year about how these ads are the biggest things in advertising. Do they still hold the same value as they did when we first started talking about it?
Even more so, I think, because they're now a news item. I mean, it's probably one of the most searched things on the web today. So not only do they get the 40 million people watching it on Super Bowl, they'll get hundreds more million who won't even watch the Super Bowl and will just watch the ads on the internet.
Well, it had us all laughing around the office. Dee, thank you very much for your time tonight.
My pleasure.
Today suggests that bushfires are almost 20 times more deadly and 80 times more destructive than a century ago. But Aussies are still building in high-risk areas. So how exactly should Australia plan for disaster?
Cities around Australia are expanding further and further into Mother Nature's territory. In Sydney, suburban sprawl is putting 1 million homes at serious risk of bushfire. And while authorities weigh up what safety measures are needed, a drama is playing out south of the border with big implications for the way society deals with risk. New laws introduced in Victoria after the Black Saturday bushfires were intended to prevent a repeat of the disaster which killed 173 people.
It's very, very important we remember the lessons of Black Saturday, we remember those awful events, and so we have to make sure our planning systems are able to cope with building in areas that are just so bushfire prone.
Strict new building standards must now be met before construction can begin in Victoria's high-risk areas. And more than 5,000 landholders have been prevented from building altogether. That's caused a big split between landowners and the government.
It is a very difficult balancing act to say to people, you can rebuild, but 2 kilometres down the road it may not be safe to do so.
In Sydney, homes in risky areas also face tight standards. But once the house is completed, there's no requirement for follow-up inspections.
It is a responsibility of any government to ensure that our planning systems are focusing on the preservation of human life first.
There's only so much preparation individual residents can do, and many of these houses are in suburbs so dangerous that if the city were planned now, they wouldn't exist at all. So should governments consider more drastic measures, like cancelling building permits or even forcibly relocating residents?
Dr. Michael Eburn is an expert in emergency management law. Michael, do people have the right to build and live in a fire zone if that's what they choose to do?
Fundamentally, I think they do. But the answer to that question, different people will have different answers to that question depending on how they see individuals' ability to assess risk and the role of government. So my short answer is yes, I think people do have the right to live in those areas, provided they understand the risk if they choose to do it. In the same way people can ride motorcycles and go skydiving if they want to.
I guess some people don't have a choice where they live. If they are in a spot which potentially is a fire risk, who do you think should be responsible for advising these people on how to live, what to do, what to build and how to keep themselves safe?
I think you can't nominate one person. It's a shared responsibility, and that's certainly the language we're using in emergency management policy today. I think local government, with guidance and help from state government, have a big responsibility. Flood maps and fire maps should be available so people can see what their risks are. It should be on people's certificate of title to warn them that they're in a risk. And then once they're in those places, agencies like the fire services, whether it's the Rural Fire Service, the Country Fire Authority, the Country Fire Service, have a huge role in keeping the message to people about where they live and what they can do to help prepare their homes and prepare themselves. So a lot of people, including the people themselves, have a responsibility. People have a responsibility to find out for themselves and to take their own precautions.
Isn't it completely reasonable for people to say, well, hang on a minute, the government shouldn't be expected to save everyone that took an unreasonable risk in where they chose to live?
I think that's an entirely reasonable thing to say. I also think that's the law. The governments aren't required to save everybody. Fire brigades in particular are there for community protection, and it's a legitimate and lawful choice for them to say, we're not going to that house. The government doesn't have to save everybody.
All right, Michael, well, good to get your thoughts tonight. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Here's a quick recap of today's headlines. Former NRL star Blake Ferguson, convicted of indecently assaulting a woman at a Cronulla bar last year, will appeal his 2-year good behaviour bond. Hollywood is paying tribute to Academy Award winner Philip Seymour Hoffman, who's died of a suspected drug overdose in New York. He was 46. Treasurer Joe Hockey's made it clear we can forget about taxpayer-funded welfare handouts. He says the age of entitlement is over. And NRL players may have their phones confiscated on game day as the league tries to crack down on gambling security. It's one of a series of measures which could be introduced to prevent players fixing matches or leaking insider information.
I'm not sure it'll cut down online betting, but it might cut down sexting before the game, I think.
If we really want to stop NRL players getting themselves into trouble, I mean, confiscate the phones, confiscate their penises.
It's an overreaction, isn't it? I mean, these are grown blokes. I mean, if they want their phones, what's the big deal?
Well, you don't want match fixing going on.
No, I don't think it's I think we've had one incident, you know. I think it's an overreaction. It's the nanny state again getting involved.
What about the idea of cracking down on the number of people in the change room so that not every man and their dog can go down there?
Oh, it should be for kids to go to the change rooms, not hangers-on and bookies.
Certainly not the dogs anyway, Carrie, I wouldn't imagine. One story you missed there, Carrie, was there was a house fire in Melbourne, and a woman had returned from lunch and found her house was on fire. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, and she maintained a positive attitude.
I just went out for lunch with my girlfriend and come home to this. Had a nice lunch, though.
Good on her. It's a cracking lunch. Good on you.
Now back to one of the biggest stories of today, in the overnight admission of Olympian Ian Thorpe into rehab for treatment. He's our greatest Olympian. On the world stage, Ian Thorpe has battled the most formidable swimmers and won the glory of international gold no less than 37 times. But it was in 2012 that Thorpe first revealed his most private battle.
I knew that I had depression when I was in my early teens. The severity of it wasn't, all that bad at that stage, but it did grow to become worse and worse.
Today, we've learned the 31-year-old hero was picked up by police at 3:15 a.m. in Panania in Sydney and taken to hospital for a medical assessment. In a statement, Thorpe's management has said he was disorientated from antidepressant drugs and painkillers for his shoulder. Police found him sitting in a car and has since been admitted to rehab for depression. No alcohol was involved.
For so many years, I was embarrassed about this. I didn't want to talk about it.
Depression is often a battle fought in private, but for one of our highest-profile athletes, his whole life has played out in the spotlight. At least now, it seems Thorpe is getting the help he needs.
This is one of those stories that makes me feel difficult doing our job on days like this, with stories like this, because all I feel like is this is a guy who just needs time and space and doesn't need everyone speculating and doesn't need everyone talking about the story.
But he's such a big name. This is our most famous Olympian, and the media can't ignore it.
But you don't need to hound him. He doesn't need to be hounded.
No, I don't think there's been any hounding. I mean, I'm hoping there's no cameras outside the hospital and all that. He should be left to recover. At the very least, what it does is it sets up another debate about how dreadful depression is and how people handle it. I mean, I'm sure Thorpe knows that he's going to be chased. I mean, he knows that. He's been chased since he was a 15-year-old kid.
He shouldn't have to be.
Well, the media are not going to back off, Peter. That's a fact.
Damn media.
Well, if you or anyone you know is struggling, you can call Lifeline. The number's 13 11 14, or you can also call Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36.
Now, as we just heard in the headlines, the government has signalled a crackdown on welfare for those Australians who need it most. Understandably, there are serious concerns about what exactly that will mean for them.
In the last year, if it hadn't been for the charity of family and friends whilst I was studying, we would be on the streets.
Like 100,000 single Aussie parents, Bianca Maciel Pizzorno is both mum and dad to her twin 9-year-old boys. It's a role she juggled well until this time last year.
I was working part-time, I was looking after my boys, I had a lot of contact with them, I was halfway through my law degree.
The changes to the welfare system shifted her off the parenting payment and onto the New Start allowance. $160 a week worse off, Bianca says she was forced to abandon her law degree to work longer hours.
It really is a blow to the ego as a parent when you feel like you can't support your kids financially. You're working, you're studying, so that you don't have to depend on welfare.
Although she works almost full-time, Bianca still needs New Start to get by. She's pleading with the government to use its welfare review to boost the basic $36 a day New Start allowance.
We want to support parents who work, and we want to support parents into work, and that's why it's so important that we can allow sole parents to study, and a low payment such as New Start is inadequate.
More than 5 million Aussies rely on welfare for all or part of their income. It costs around $70 billion a year, and with an ageing population, almost half goes on the age pension.
The reality is that we have inherited the largest Commonwealth debt ever in the history of this country.
So the government says something's got to give, in the form of big changes to unemployment benefits and the disability pension.
It's because I do work part-time. I'm worried when they do reviews that they may think, well, she can work part-time, therefore she can work full-time.
38-year-old Joanne Hutchins has been on a disability support pension for almost 2 decades after developing a muscle-wasting condition as a child. Until 3 years ago, she couldn't get a job.
There are so many barriers, such as access to buildings, access to public transport, and employer prejudices.
Joanne fears the government's review could push people like her off the pension without jobs to go to.
The people that want to work and can work, they need to provide them with services and help to do that.
The government's ruled out taking an axe to the age pension or proposed paid parental leave, a decision that's confused economists and community groups.
The age pension is the biggest expenditure, and there's also a significant opportunity around looking at the inclusion of the primary residence in the asset test for the age pension.
We think that there's room for moving the payment payments that are going to people on higher income. Certainly we need to be looking at some of the tax breaks and loopholes associated with discretionary trust, the way in which superannuation is used just as a tax minimisation vehicle.
Any person earning over $75,000 a year receiving paid parental leave is a bit excessive when you're looking at families living in cars. It just doesn't make sense.
What does make sense for Bianca and her boys is putting support systems ahead of savings to the bottom line.
I just want to finish my studies so that I can provide a better future for them, and that's only going to happen if we reform welfare in a way that's going to support sole parents.
I hear everything those people are saying there, and I feel for people who struggle.